Rainer, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon at today's seminar, where we were discussing Indonesia's economic openness. You were making some very important points about trade and imports and how the system needs to be open to imports in order to allow for investment and then ultimately exports. Could you perhaps explain that a bit more?
Here in the country, there is a strong fear of imports, or rather at least of a negative trade balance. It's probably born out of the crisis in the late 1990s that was so instrumental here for this country. So basically people, whenever the trade balance turns negative, people are really worried. The currency might depreciate as it did in the late 1990s. People will fall back into poverty. It was such a traumatic experience that people are still, the discourse is very much shaped by this. So what we are trying to do, and not just us, others as well, want to make the point that if you want to develop a country, you need technology, and for that you need imports. And so if you want to actually have foreign direct investment coming into the country, it will require imports. As a question of managing it well, but it's also an issue of really attracting imports to come into the country.
And in addition to imports and FDI, what would you say is the next biggest priority for the second term of the president?
Clearly education. We're having you can almost call it a crisis here. The education system is not able to really develop and deliver the skills that are necessary to for the companies to recruit the human resources that they need for their purposes. And what you've seen in Korea, China, Vietnam, they have a very strong focus on producing those skills in the people so that they can actually work for the companies who are coming to invest. And Indonesia is very weak at that. So it's very, very difficult for companies to find the human resources that they need, the skilled human resources that they need. That's a massive challenge. And the president has now made it as one of his priorities to actually develop vocational education so that we do get these skilled laborers.
Does the labor market need to be reformed to help bring those skills on board and to make it easier to hire workers?
Indeed, the issue with the labor market is that it has very high redundancy costs. Severance payments can reach up to 60 monthly salaries. It's an incredible amount of money. And it used to be for the purpose of a social welfare kind of effect, so that when people leave a company after decades of employment, they would actually have a certain amount of money. There was no pension fund, there was no health insurance, so that was the only way people would walk away with a certain amount of money after they retire. But now we do have a social welfare system that is being created. We have a universal healthcare system. There's other programs being in the making. And now these kind of redundancy costs are actually getting in the way for investors, and they don't make sense anymore when you have these other welfare systems.
I know there are other parts of the system that no longer make sense that also could be benefiting from reform.
Well, we have another big problem here is the what is in the ease of doing business index called the starting a business situation. And these are requirements that are so difficult to comply with. We have sometimes on paper, we have an improvement. On paper, by that I mean we have certain regulations that are made in Jakarta in the central government, but they are not necessarily implemented by the local governments, which have a considerable amount of autonomy by now in the way they apply the rules. So you have highly complicated registration systems, and this is absolutely outdated. Now what we have at the same time is a boom in e-commerce. So these e-commerce companies, they are basically allowing people, interestingly, to stay in the informal sector. Because with e-commerce also comes fintech, and with that comes access to credit markets without actually being a registered enterprise. So on the one hand, it's harder for the government to get businesses to get into the formal sector with the e-commerce boom. But on the other hand, also it's not anymore the incentive for you to go into the formal sector to get a loan, because you get that anyway through the fintech sector. And the banks are quite risk averse, as in any other country. So those registration rules are clearly outdated. They are an anachronism and stand in the way of local development.
Is this evidence of a parallel system of formalization where actually the private sector, aka the fintech sector, is going to be the main group that recognizes the existence of particular enterprises?
It's an expression of the existing structure of the economy that you have also mentioned earlier in the seminar in your presentation. The overwhelming importance of the informal sector in this economy, in particular for the poor people. Once you are entering Jakarta, you are in the central business district. Of course, you see registered enterprises, you see formalized structures. But the more you go out of the capital city, you are in an informal economy environment, and e-commerce deals with and thrives exactly in that environment, and so is fintech.
Rainer, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.